Our God and our Father, we are gathered here in your name and in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. We are here because it's only you who have wisdom who can give us wisdom. You have brought us together to see how we can continue to do your work in helping and loving each other. Our sisters and brothers in America, and we from Sierra Leone, we look up to you that you will give us wisdom enough to be able to look at the priorities and the projects that we want to undertake together to glorify your name in heaven. Father, as we gather here, we hear news of cholera breakout in Sierra Leone. Innocent children and adults are dying for lack of medical aid, for lack of knowing simple basic hygiene. We pray, dear Lord, that you provide leadership, you provide the means to be able to get to the rescue of those who are already affected and those that can be prevented from being affected. Father, we invite you to come now into this place and take full control of this meeting. You be the chairperson, direct us in all we do. As we may have to go back to our various destinations, we invite you to remember us, O God, in our travels. May you help us that we will go back safely. All we do here, we do it in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, we pray.
Good morning. My name is Reverend Kathy DeCreedy from the East Ohio Conference, and I've been asked to moderate this conversation, and it's been easy so far, or at least it looked like it from where you all sit, so here we go. I'll have us all go around and introduce ourselves, tell us where you're from and the institution or the organization that you represent, and we will then hear from the bishop about what the goals are for the annual conference.
I am Amadou Doika. Permit me to say I'm here with my wife, Elizabeth. I am the president of the Sierra Leone Annual Conference, and I work closely with the bishop and his staff at the conference head office.
Bishop Yambasu.
I'm Patty Morell, and I live in Massachusetts currently. My second home is Sierra Leone, and my other home is Virginia, because we lived here for 27 years.
Hi, I'm Pam Perna. I'm from the Susquehanna Conference in Pennsylvania with the Sierra Leone Initiative.
Bishop, will you tell us about the priorities and the goals for church development that we're here to talk about today in Sierra Leone?
Yeah, sure. Well, most of these I've shared with you yesterday in my address, but I have a few of them listed here, which includes the rehabilitation or completion of all dilapidated and unfinished church buildings, and that also includes parsonages. We want to expand the United Methodist Church to all the 12 political districts in the country, and out of those 12 political districts, we are already in 11 of them. We want to emphasize on theological and lay pastoral education. We want to establish a United Methodist School of Theology. And then we want to double our membership from 225,000 to 450,000 by 2020.
If you could rank those as the top three, which would be your priority and why?
The top three will include rehabilitation and completion of all unfinished churches and parsonages. The other one will be theological and lay pastoral education. Those are the two top priorities because The establishment of United Methodist School of Theology or pastoral education will cover the rest.
Okay. Good. I was impressed, as I said before yesterday, most of my work is done in Liberia, and I was very impressed to hear about your salaries and that pastors are really being supported, because that is far ahead of where I know of the Liberia Annual Conference. And so the work that y'all are doing is to be commended in those places. Mr. Ndoika, thank you. From what is your perspective of the bishop's priorities as he shares them and begins to rank them?
Yes, as I introduced myself yesterday, I am part and parcel of the setting of goals and priority of the bishop and therefore the annual conference. In my capacity as president of the CCF&A, we do discuss and counsel all these priorities. We approve them before they go to the annual general conference for them to be ratified. Church development in Sierra Leone and for the UMC is of vital importance. You all know what 11 years of war did to the entire country. It was not part of the country. Onto the city of Freetown, the war came there. Destruction as a result of the war is one. Abandoning those assets for several years where it was a no-go area also helped to deteriorate the assets. It is an enormous tax, and these are valuable assets. I see the wisdom in it that we have to start there. But what I would like to see, or the bishop to comment on, and our partners, is that as a strategy, can we really identify the key assets that are badly damaged, cost estimate them, and see if we can make a shopping list for specific projects and go after them so that we will have a yardstick to measure ourselves. That is one thing I would like to see input coming from the bishop and his cabinet and from our partners. The other thing that I look at it will be of importance to us is what is the role of the community in which these assets are located? How can we encourage them to take ownership of them? Because no matter what the bishop is trying to do, and no matter what contributions you people are making, our partners, if the community fails to take ownership of those properties, then the bishop cannot be in all places at the same time. Only our master can do that. So I believe it will be of importance, and I would like to see ideas coming especially from our partners, because you have varied experience, as you were talking about Liberia, how the community will take ownership of these assets. The third issue I would like to share, and again I would ask the bishop to consider, is the job of rehabilitation is so big that perhaps it's about time that we get a full-time business manager of the conference who will really compile these projects, write new projects, and see that when we have a shopping list, we'll have premises or context in which we will discuss. The other priority of theological education, that one, it will be an underestimation. We had one university in Sierra Leone for several years. Then in the 60s, we had a second one. Now we are talking about 4 universities or 5. So the increase in education for the younger people is becoming more and more each day. What I mean by that, the congregation now has knowledge to read into sermons, to quest for God's word, but to have a better understanding. So, theological education, it will be an importance for the Sierra Leone Annual Conference in the United Methodist Church. Failing that, we will have and will continue to experience congregational migration, I will call it, because the young folks are moving to charismatic churches. And if you see the leaders of these churches, they are well versed in theology. And some of them are public speakers, trained and qualified. So you can see that these young congregational people are moving towards those churches because they have a better understanding of the theology as presented by these people. So I feel the bishop has a laudable project in ensuring that we have tertiary education. You remember the mission of old went to Africa, first with a church, or in fact with the education. They started establishing school. Harvard Academy, you had 1904. Then they were creating the feeder for the churches. We have had schools for quite a long time. I'm not saying they are not important, but going for tertiary education is the right direction. I'll stop for now.
Patty, will you share with us about the Global Leadership Summit in Sierra Leone?
Sure. I represent a large organization called the Willow Creek Association out of Chicago. And the Willow Creek Association has a program called the Global Leadership Summit. And it's an annual 2-day event that's designed to transform Christian leaders with an injection of vision, skill development, and inspiration for the sake of the local church. And Reverend Bill Hybels is the senior pastor of the Willow Creek Community Church, where the Global Leadership Summit takes place in the United States. And his mantra is that the local church is the hope of the world. And the summit provides leaders the forum to learn, to share, to exchange ideas, and develop a plan to improve their organization. And Alan and I just returned from the GLS last week. It is simulcast by satellite to over 200 churches in the United States in real time or near real time. It's held at the same time each year in August, and this year there were over 70,000 people who attended either in Chicago or at one of these satellite sites. And the great thing is this program has an international component which takes culturally applicable training sessions from the US GLS to over 90 countries around the world. And Alan and I were blessed to be present with many of the GLS leaders from the international countries. We were also there not only to attend the summit, but to help plan the events that are going to take place this fall in these 90 countries. So in 2008, with Bishop Yambasu's recommendation, we took the GLS concept to the Council of Churches in Sierra Leone that represents over 15 different denominations in Sierra Leone. And the council expressed an interest in exploring how the GLS could be brought to Sierra Leone. And so in 2009, we accompanied 4 representatives that the Council of Churches selected to attend a GLS in Ghana, so we could all experience how a GLS is implemented in a West African country. And then shortly after that, after the team returned and made a presentation to the Council of Churches, they said they did want it to come to Sierra Leone, and shortly after that, the Willow Creek Association accepted Sierra Leone as a new country where the GLS could be held. And so in 2010 was the first summit in Freetown, and then last year in 2011, we expanded to 2 sites, one in Freetown and one in Bow, and they were very well received. And this year, the GLS will again be held in Bow and in Freetown. In Bow, it'll be on 5 and 6 October, and in Freetown on 12 and 13 October. When a leader gets better, everybody wins. And so, talking about Reverend Doika, the things that he just recommended, if we can equip leaders, then they can implement some of the things that he talked about inventorying assets and taking ownership of these assets. And so we just really feel that the GLS is something that can encourage, excite, empower leaders. And we're talking about all leaders. We're talking about youth. You talked about the youth in the church, women, men, pastors, worship leaders, committee leaders. And the way that the GLS can really have the most impact is to get multiple leaders from churches and from organizations to attend, because then those leaders can get together and they can brainstorm, they can set goals, they can hold each other accountable, and it's really exciting. Thank you.
Thanks. Pam, can you tell us about your conference's work in Sierra Leone?
Sure. The Sierra Leone initiative began in 2006 officially after a Volunteers in Mission team in 2003 saw the dire need of pastors. And so for 3 years, with the help of GBGM, the General Board of Global Ministries, a group of concerned Pennsylvanians explored establishing a contract between the Sierra Leone Annual Conference and the Susquehanna Conference, the then Central Pennsylvania Conference. From 2006 to the present day, we have increased our commitment to the pastors significantly. Would we like to increase it more? Absolutely. Our goal is to a covenant with 80 churches. We are currently at 67. And those 67 either churches or individuals or Sunday school classes currently support about 60 full-time pastors. It's a daunting task, and we would love to do more and have more of our churches join. So that's one of the things we'll be working on for the future, of course, finding more covenant churches. We have a secondary goal that is as important, I believe, as the first. And our secondary goal has just grown exponentially as the 6 years have advanced. And that secondary goal is partnering churches in Sierra Leone with the church in the Susquehanna Conference. Anything that is done for that partner church is not controlled by the initiative, it is controlled by the partner churches. Some are small, some are large. Some have sent a representative on our Volunteers in Mission trips and have established wonderful relationships. That's what we would hope every church would do. Because as soon as you've sent someone to Sierra Leone, you're hooked.
Amen?
You're in love with the country and with the people, and it just changes your life. I speak from experience. It changes your life. And so as these partner churches send someone in mission and establish a relationship, it just becomes a wonderful situation. Some of the churches have sent just money, not that that's a just, but they've sent money. And the relationship may be putting a roof on a church. It might be digging a well. It might be digging a latrine. It's up to the church and the needs expressed by the church in Sierra Leone. So that is a growing part of the Sierra Leone initiative. In addition, because basically of that relationship, we've started shipping containers to Sierra Leone. The partner churches will fill probably more than one a year, but at least we send one a year. The gentleman who was here earlier this week, Steve Herman, is our shipping guru. What I would like to do to finish is to let Mr. Doke talk about our most successful relationship. In the audience is Fred Clark. Wave, Fred. From Camp Hill United Methodist Church, which is partnered with the Lower Bambara Church in Panguma. And Mr. Doke is very involved in this relationship, and they are both responsible for the success of it. And for me to tell you third hand won't be as good as having someone who's involved firsthand tell you what these partnerships can do.
Thank you, Pam. Bishop. The relationship between the Lower Bambara United Methodist Church and Camp Hill United Methodist Church, I will call it a divine intervention. Honest, I'm saying this. After the end of the war, my wife and I were struggling. We come from Lower Bambara in Pangoma to see if we can put a roof on the church. Only the 4 structures were standing, the walls, but you can see the sky if you sit in the church. And once in a while we go there. Fred was on a mission visit, and he was giving a stipend for the pastor that was in Pangoma then in Lower Bambara Church. Because of the remote part of the country, the roads were so bad that Fred was prevailed on not to attempt to get to Pangoma. He stopped in Bo, and they have to return because they were in a group to Freetown. At the conference head office, he asked, how can I get this stipend to that pastor in Pangoma? And my name came up at that time. Somebody at the conference office said, there is a gentleman that comes from that area, and he's a United Methodist, and he worships in this church. But you call him, and they gave my number to Fred. From that time, I told my wife that Fred has brought something, but for the pastor. And my wife said, can we have him for dinner? I asked her. He said, yes. He said, is he alone? I said, no, there are about 15 or 16 of them. And my wife said, bring all of them home. Steve was in that meeting, the Steve you spoke about, and I had never met all of these people. In that meeting that night, we were able to share our house, what the problems were in Pangoma. Fred was moved. He went back to his church, told them the story, and the next time, Fred, how many of you were you? About 8 of you, the first visit? About 8 of them. They all came to Pangoma, braving the bad road that prevented him. They said, we will go. And when they saw the church condition, they saw the people, the need they had, they have been on fire forever and ever. They saw the building, and in no time, they were able to send enough funds that we should put a roof on that building, rehabilitate it, tile it, and paint it. The next minute I had, we are building a brand new parsonage that's far advanced. Before we could rest, computers came with generator for them to be installed for the secondary school, and I cannot sleep. I get telephone calls, and that please, could you please arrange for scholarship to be awarded to those children? And before you think twice, they said, can we feed the secondary and the primary school children? And they were dishing out the food. 3 times they have been to Pangoma. I cannot believe it. To be quite honest, this is divine intervention. As I said, I cannot really tell you all, because this all is happening in 3 years. They are now looking at teacher migration. You remember I spoke about congregational migration. The teachers will not stay, no matter how you train them, they will not stay in a remote place if there is no accommodation for them, and they are not sure when their salaries will come. They are now ready to put teacher accommodation. The last time they took school materials to give to the children, they were in the school building is now overflowing because the increase in student intake has become more than treble. So they were in thatch buildings made out of bamboo thatch. And the next thing I had, they said, Amadou, can we think of putting a building for this, classroom building for these children? Because that is not a good condition for them to learn in. The church is sitting on, we are talking about 500 acres, but the church is sitting on my father's land. So it's more than 500 acres, because that's where I was born. The farming was happening there, so it's a massive land. And what we are hearing is that, can they do sustainable agriculture? I say, yes, of course. The whole land belongs, we can give it to the church. I will talk to my family. And they are now thinking of sustainable agriculture so that the students themselves will do their agricultural practice on their own farm, produce, and they can get food from, sell to the community and to the hospital that is there, etc., etc. I think I call it divine intervention. That's how I have codenamed it. And I thank Fred and Camp Hill congregation. We are grateful to God and to you for what you are doing in our lives.
Thank you. Fred, is there anything that you'd like to share that is burning on your heart?
I couldn't say it as well as the monitors.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
I guess I would just say,
To God be the glory. Amen. The East Ohio Conference has been most involved in the work around the Manjima Hospital and or Manjima Clinic Health Center. And we are eager to learn more about the churches that are in that area, that we might be a part of your goals and initiatives around rehabilitating. I know Beth is planning on taking at least 2 teams from East Ohio to work in Manjima in 2013, and taking some pastors and maybe some district superintendents to be a part of doing some training and some learning from the Sierra Leoneans as well around pastoral leadership. And so those are the ways that East Ohio is probably most interested in your list of goals around church development and priorities. What do you think, Bishop, and then I will ask the panelists as well, are the challenges to church development? Not just that could be bricks and mortar, but that could also be training up pastors or even retaining pastors in some of those rural areas. But what do you think are the challenges to church development in a broad sense? Bishop, I'll let you go first.
Well, if I can answer that, one of the major challenges in church development is we can go into this community and we can build a church. We can get the new congregation and they become very functional. But the serious challenge that is always associated with that is every parsonage must go, every church must go with a parsonage. Mm-hmm. And for most of the time, all of those churches, most of the churches do not have parsonages. And the pastor lives within the community and sometimes cohabiting, especially in the rural communities, with other people. Mm-hmm. And that becomes a very serious challenge. So what our goal is that for every building that we put up, a church building, we have a parsonage. And so that the pastor is very free to do with his family, to live in that place with his family, and is able to do some more effective ministry. So parsonages become very, very much important in that area. So far, that's one major challenge. The other challenge of moving, which we are now beginning next year, that we're now trying to address, is many of our pastors who work in the rural communities have about 4, 5, 6 children. One of the good things that has happened is that before this time, the pastors we are saying, Bishop, we spend all our time ministering to other people's children. Our own children are not being ministered to. You send us in these communities, the children are not going to school. We cannot afford school fees for them. But one good thing that has come out of that is what Susquehanna has done. Now that the pastors are getting salaries, they are now able to pay school fees for their children. But even that, it still, it still takes some hold challenging that because the little resources that they have that they spend. So one of the things we're now trying to do is, can we, for each of those schools, and that's one interesting success stories that Camp Hill is doing. The pastor goes to the school, to the church, and is a pastor there, and if they are given scholarship, definitely the pastor's children must be among those who are receiving the scholarship. So if we give scholarship to the pastor's children, then the pastor is better able to stay in the community and to work, and for as long as, he may want to stay there. So those are some of the challenges, that associated with church development.
Anyone else on the panel?
I'd like to just make a comment. Camp Hill is a major success story, but Camp Hill is a large church. Some of our smaller churches are not able to provide the same type of help that the larger churches can do. So what we're looking at doing is changing the way we have our paperwork organized. Our own conference changed in number of districts. So I needed to change all my paperwork anyway. But as I thought about it and prayed about it, the Lord said, why not take and organize the churches not by districts within Susquehanna Conference, but by districts within Sierra Leone. By doing that, what we come up with is a network of churches who are all working in the same area of Sierra Leone. Fred has already gone and spoken at 2 churches that are part of the Panguma Circuit, that are partner churches. So we all benefit by establishing that kind of a relationship. And they can work together in that area. And if one church can't afford, maybe together they can afford to make a difference. So is a challenge for our smaller churches, and that's one way that I see that we can help change that.
Be Sierra Leonean focused rather than self-focused.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
And that's the way it should be.
Great. Yeah, right. How does the work of the church in other areas such as education, construction, agriculture, or healthcare that we've heard from this week or these couple days support or affect development in the church itself? How does education, construction, agriculture, and healthcare support the work of church development?
Maybe let me just talk about agriculture, which is a new trend that we're trying to really venture into. From all our conversations yesterday and, from the last 2 days, it appears to me that agriculture is becoming a major trend in our church development work. For most of the areas where our churches are, for example, let's take Magic Penny. Magic Penny is built, the school is built on a 7-acre land. As of now, I'm not sure they are using up to even 1 acre. There's about some 6 acres of land that is just there. So one of the things we want to do, and many of these children go to school hungry. While we are talking about feeding the children, that may not be a sustainable something that continues forever, having food from World Food Program or so. So we're trying to see how best we can utilize this land that is there, that's just not used, into some kind of agricultural production process, so that the proceeds or the yields from those farmlands could be used either to sell and the funds used to develop the school, or the children can be fed on some of those. We can have the parents in those communities to farm that land and maybe give a token of the proceeds back to the school so that that is plowed into. And that way we'll be able to use some funding from those proceeds either to build staff quarters for the people or maybe continue with the feeding program. So agriculture is becoming a new trend, and that's one of the things that we really want to encourage our partners for us to see how far we can go into that. We've been having conversations with Operation Classroom, and we are almost there in that process. We're just taking some very active studies on that to see how we can begin with one or two, schools. And then based on those experiences that we get from there, we'll be able to translate that to all of the other schools in the country. I think all it takes is just about beginning it in one or two places so that every other person will see. Mm-hmm. And the thing about it is that we were talking about ownership. We really want to make sure that the school, the community, actually takes ownership of that. And all they will want basically is, can we have the basic tools and all the rest of that? And interestingly, we are using primitive kind of agricultural tools that could easily be obtained in Sierra Leone and will be made over there. So all of that will make things very easy for us. But that's just one thinking that we think we have really to go into in terms of agriculture.
And I think that you all have highlighted how the school has impacted in your area the attendance or the possibility for attendance in worship. And it's interesting to hear you share about the kind of competition you feel around the more charismatic churches, because I think we have some of those same issues and dynamics in our own culture that we struggle with. And so it's even how do we do some of that ourselves in those ways, and your church development, Patty, that you talk about. And I'm curious, as we have Shannon here yesterday under the healthcare from the general church, is what other general church resources are there out there that this group could gather from around Board of Discipleship, around Emmaus communities and things to help church development in those ways as we build the spiritual house, not just the bricks and the mortar in Sierra Leone and do those rehabbing, but that we rehab souls and confidence in our leaders. Are there other challenges that you would like to talk about, or other agriculture and education and construction and healthcare as a way of supporting and conquering those challenges?
Well, maybe except for you people, I know all of you who have been to Sierra Leone understand that very clearly, why we have always emphasized on education. For a good number of us who are here, Sierra Leoneans who are here, we happen to be Christians because we went to United Methodist schools, and that's why we are United Methodists. And that's a common thing all over, in Sierra Leone. And so we're using education as a kind of evangelistic thrust. Mm-hmm. If we have a school with 1,000 students, and our school do not segregate, Muslims and Christians go there. You have a school of 1,000 students entering a school in 1 year. By the time they exit the school 5 years down the line, maybe out of the 1,000, 100 or 200 of them will at least be Christians. And so that's the big advantage. So that while we're talking about the explosion of membership of our churches in Africa, that's just one of the good reasons. And so wherever we go, we really emphasize on education. And that's why we're talking about spiritual development, Christian education, and all the rest of that in our schools. Because the hope is that by the time the children go out of the line in the next 6 years, a good number of them were already United Methodists.
Yes, my take on that, education, at the preschool and kindergarten level in mission schools, during Easter, for instance, the Sunday school children are gathered to perform some plays in the afternoon, or in the end of the school session of the term, they do plays. Those children bring their parents to church to witness them performing arts during church service or their Thanksgiving service. The parents will begin to understand. For instance, I was telling some people at one of those sessions, the children were doing the play, The Crucifixion of Jesus Christ. They were dramatizing it. And this illiterate woman was sitting by me. I don't think she went to school because we only spoke the patois, we call it. I asked her. And because the way the children were dramatizing, this woman was shedding tears. So I asked her, why are you crying? Then she explained to me in Creole. He said, "Na in Paddy betrayal, and I make them the killer. And so this word tongue, and that make her they cry." I said, "Oh, that Jesus was betrayed by his own friend. And this is how the world is. Our friends, sometimes we consider our friends, betray us." That woman, how she understood that thing, and she was crying, I thought it was a great impact that those children dramatized the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and here the parents were in the congregation, they understood it. So preschool, kindergarten, the church really developing that. You bring those parents to church, and at least a percentage will come to know Christ as the Savior. I think it's important, and it's quite a challenge for us to address it while we are developing schools.
Do any of you in the audience have questions for the bishop or any of the panelists? You can step to the microphone now.
How many of you have been to General Conference? Microphone one?
I just wanted to share that, we feel that leaders are multipliers, and when you train a leader, they can have a big impact on their organization. They can cause a great change in their organization and the other leaders in the organization. And so I want to encourage all of you to tell people about the GLS, people that you know in Sierra Leone, the organizations to which you're connected and the churches to which you're connected. Mary Beth is going to send an email out to everyone who attended this conference, and she'll have information there of who can be contacted in Bow and in Freetown to register for the Global Leadership Summit. The cost is only 45,000 leones, which is approximately $10 for 2 days. Includes their meals, includes a handbook. And if we can get people to attend, then these leaders can help the bishop achieve his goals. And so I just would really encourage all of you to help promote the Global Leadership Summit. And Al and I are available for questions later if you have any additional questions about it.
Beth?
I'm just wondering what the church position is and how we relate. All of the villages that I have been in and around Manjima are basically half and half Christian Muslim. They have mosque and they have churches. And I'm thinking of Manjima village in particular, that there's a mosque and a church. The church is rather dilapidated. I don't think there's a pastor assigned there. I think Augustine Pessima takes that role. And I'm just wondering how, as we develop churches I don't know if this is general in Sierra Leone in all villages, but the ones that I've been to, if they don't have a church, they have a mosque, and we're doing Christian work in those areas. And what is our strategy? How do we relate? They were accepting. We did Christian prayers. We did Muslim prayers, on the veranda of somebody's house when I was in each village. But I know that they're giving lip service to both religions. And can you address? I don't know what my concern is. I just know that it's how it is on the ground in the area that I worked in. So how do we relate as a United Methodist Church and impact that village, those villagers, without getting into conflict? I don't know that there's a question there, but maybe it's an observation.
I don't know whether this can be an appropriate answer to your question, but one of the things that some of you may have learned about Sierra Leone is that among the nations of the world, we are one of the very few that maintains a very positive relationship between Muslims and Christians, to the extent that Muslims and Christians. And that was one thing that really helped us during the 10-year war. Because otherwise, if that was translated into a religious war, it was going to be very messy for us. But Christians and Muslims joined hands together, went into the bush to speak to those rebels to down their tools. And we working as a United Methodist, we work with the communities. When we go to a community, for example, to open a church, for example, when we went to dedicate the Panguma Church, Muslims were there. The chiefs and everybody, they were all there. They came into the church, and we all worship together. If we're going to put up a public building, say like a school, the school is not just meant for United Methodists. It's also meant for the entire community, which means Muslims are going to be there. So under those circumstances, we don't want to leave them behind. We do what they call the Al-Fatiha, which is a prayer to the Lord's Prayer. And then after that, we do our Christian prayer. It's one of those things you don't mix up at all, otherwise you mess the whole thing. Because people, the school there is not just for Christians. And we continue to really make sure that we don't miss that aspect. I have been to the mosque for a wedding in a mosque as bishop, and I remove my shoes, and I sit down on the mat. And while they are saying the Al-Fatiha, I'm saying my Lord's Prayer. And at the end, we leave, and we go and celebrate. It's just unique. That doesn't in any way mean that we're watering down our Christianity, but it's a way of living in a harmonious relationship with the next person. And it's a way of also telling the next person that you have a faith that you're practicing, and sometimes you even evangelize through that. You even evangelize through that. When Muslims and Christians marry, and then the children grow up, on Fridays, the children go with the mother to the mosque. On Sundays, they go with the father to the church. Until the children grow up, and when they are of age, they now decide where to go. And that means that as the child grows up, he has a fair perspective of which is the truth. Is it Christianity or is it Islam? And for Sierra Leone, for most of the time, that's the new trend happening now. And the final analysis, my experience has been most of those children can't grow up to be Christians. That's really what is happening. And it's something we continue to really celebrate and thank God for.
And that for some of us in some of our churches could become the challenge, to explain that in those ways. And to, because we don't all come from places where there would be that clapping and that understanding. And so that becomes for us a challenge for interpretations at times, I think, to be honest. Yeah. Other questions? Go ahead, Bob.
A couple of weeks ago, while we were out in the Servants of Sierra Leone conference in South Dakota, we had conversation with the bishop about introducing Walk to Emmaus to Sierra Leone. Within the United Methodist Church here in the United States, over the last 25 years, Emmaus, which is sponsored by the Upper Room, has been far and away the largest leadership development program in our denomination. I know in Indiana today, probably half of all local pastors that have been raised up to serve our small and rural churches have come out of the Emmaus community, because it's a lay-led organization and it's a lay-led movement, and it builds and strengthens leadership, especially in the small local church. And since I served on the international steering committee for 4 years for Walk to Emmaus, I would love to see Walk to Emmaus used as a tool in Sierra Leone to raise up local leadership.
It would be great when our Sierra Leone friends are here to sponsor them on a walk here so that they can experience that and have that to take home and own that, as you talk about empowerment and wanting the Sierra Leoneans to own those kinds of ministries. It would be a dynamic thing. And there's a tradition of Emmaus going to other countries and expanding their vision. Yeah. Any other comments?
I'd like to say
Bob just stepped out of the room.
just stepped out. I went through the walk.
Can you step up closer to the microphone a little bit? please?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I went through the walk, LV50, about 5 years ago, and for me, coming from Africa, Ghana, and the Methodist culture and all that, it was a little moving for me, and I learned a lot, and it was something different that I have tried to transfer it to Ghana as well, but the difference is the visa and stuff that they have to come here and go, and the expenses involved in it. It's a big challenge, but if we can take on to that aspect, as he mentioned, it will be a great for African country as well.
Thank you for that witness.
As what we would like to get on this side, we the Sierra Leoneans, quite a number of our partners are resident in Sierra Leone. They have stayed 1 or 2 years. They interact with our community at different levels, but more specifically in the workplace and in the immediate community. They must be facing challenges which the conference may not be aware of. And perhaps, as we said here today, we have, i.e., religious tolerance. And also, there may be a cultural misunderstanding of doing things. Either you have to shake hands with women or not. And there are challenges, you, the partners who visit, or those who are resident there, that you are facing in the community or the workplace you are working, so that you can bring it out here, and that will help us to organize your reception into our various projects and within our communities in the near future. So I'd like to hear some comments from the floor, and for those who have worked in Sierra Leone.
What are the challenges that we face as Western partners as we enter Sierra Leone and the United Methodist Church as we come to do work is the question before you. It's easy. No challenges.
The challenges that we face is communication.
Okay.
How can we communicate together? And corruption.
Corruption?
Yes.
Communication?
These are the two bridges that I faced anytime I take a program here to Africa, is the corruption and communication. How can you help us to address these issues?
For us in Sierra Leone, one of the issues has been that a number of you have been to Sierra Leone so often that Sierra Leone is now your home, and you know how to meander your ways, so you've taken things for granted. But sometimes it doesn't always work all that smoothly. And so sometimes some people might just want to leave and go to Sierra Leone without the office really knowing about it. I am really not fussy about that, but in case you run into a problem, then the office takes responsibility. So we want to caution every one of you, let us know to say you are going on this day, and we have a number of partners here who are very excellent on that. Maybe 1 month or 2 months or 3 months before they go, they have given us a rundown of all the teams and the dates that they will be there. And in some cases, we've asked them, do you want any assistance from us? A number of you don't, because they already know. But just in case, let us know that you will be there at this time, and we will get the standby personnel to make sure that they really contact you as you go. And then also, if you're going, for instance, for education, we have an education secretary. Make sure you contact the education secretary. If you're going for health, we have a health coordinator. If you're going for theological education, we have somebody, so that all of those personnel who are directly responsible to run those programs in the ANA conference are in the know, because when things go wrong, they are the people the bishop would directly ask, why did this happen? So that way, we will be in the loop and we know what to do. But there is one thing that we have now done on our part. It's been a challenge, especially those of you working with churches in the rural communities, for you to be able to communicate with them, no email, no very few cell phones around in those communities. The Connection and Ministries Director, Reverend Ashcroft, will be sending all of those information to some of you, is now the person that will be taking care of all of those communications. So you can connect directly with him to say, we are coming to Sierra Leone. And besides that, my office, my secretary is very good at communication. Once you send that information to me and copy her, she will be able to translate that information to all of those people that will be there. So we just want to make that clear to you in terms of communication. About corruption, there is very little I can say about that, because as far as I am concerned, for the last 8 years, for the last 4 years, I have not had any incident from any one of you to say there is corruption. I know there is one instance of a driver that messed up with a team that went with their money, and summarily we just dismissed that driver. But that's just one case that I have known of. But otherwise, we have done everything possible to give a thorough orientation to all of the drivers and to all the personnel working with volunteers in mission to make sure that they do nothing but the right thing. But another thing to help us, please don't conceal anything that happens while you are there. Let us really know whether it is a bad experience or a good experience. Let's share it. Some teams have been very good at that. Unfortunately, some of the time I'm not around. But before they go, they always make sure they pay a call on the bishop's office. We sit down and chat and all the rest of it. And often I've always prayed with them. And when they do their teamwork and they are getting back, we all get together again, even if very briefly. And they have given me a feedback on their experiences. Those things that you go through, whether good or bad, are good for us, because they will help us to be able to stop them from happening next time. There are some people that may say, well, we don't want to disturb the bishop. We don't want to create any alarm. It's just one odd thing. But one single odd thing may lead to another odd thing, may lead to another odd thing. So let's try to nip it right at the bud and be very transparent with us. Don't hesitate to come to me and say, hey, Bishop, this went wrong. We didn't like the way you treated us here. We didn't like the way it happened here. We love those feedbacks from you, because after all, you're going to be with us. We're all working together, and we all come together to resolve some of those issues.
The teams that go into the health area, I often would want them to come to my office, and I have a one-on-one talk about cultural things like touching and embracing others, food, carrying water, those kinds of things. I always would brief the teams that come to my office. Like I work with Julie and Doris acting. They would always bring their teams to my office, and they would ask even about the practice, about the conditions, the minor illnesses that they would expect to see, and what are the issues. You know, they would always raise concerns. That's very good. It's better to prevent issues. We are a touching community. Our culture is a touching culture. We touch men and women. That does not mean anything. But I try to orientate my teams that come into health that if a small child comes or a man touches you, it doesn't mean anything. Because I find those are some of the issues that Americans find difficult to accept. So when you come through our office, I would always say, okay, the bishop is here. Shall we go to the bishop's office? Or it is Wednesday. Shall we go for devotion? Or this and the other. And I always caution our teams that they must always keep your valuables on your person, so that you don't tempt somebody else reaching for them. So those are some of the ways I have handled. I've tried to deal with the cultural aspects, which actually sometimes is overwhelming for our friends. Bishop.
Well, thank you, Sister Gbanga. we don't want to make it a hard and fast rule that you must go to the UMC house. Because we know sometimes you go, you have your tight schedule. But what we will insist on is that prior to your departure, let there be a communication with the head of department to say you are going. And we all have emails. Just about a month ago, we now have a Wi-Fi in the office, so everybody that has a laptop in the office now can access the email. Just write to us to say, hey, we're coming on this day, there are 10 of us on the team, and this is what we expect from you. There are times it may be slow to get back to you, but that means you have to give us some long information, and we will really appreciate that. But where you can afford the luxury of time, come to the UMC house, and we've always introduced some of you, especially those who go on Wednesdays. We've invited you to be part of our prayer worship service. Every Wednesday we meet, and then we introduce you to the church, to all of those working in the office. That way, the partnership gives meaning to the partnership.
My question's for Patty and for the Bishop. The Global Leadership Summit, I think, is a really productive activity, and part of the reason is that many of us who are pastors attend that here in the United States. And so if Sierra Leonean clergy are also attending that, then we have a mutual experience whenever we get together, and I just think that sort of thing. They've also worked very hard to have an international faculty so that it's not simply an American-based leadership experience. The question I have for the two of you is, in what ways is the Sierra Leone Annual Conference encouraging participation at that event and using that as a leadership development tool? And are you seeing fruit from that as a result amongst your clergy or laity who attend? And then a separate question along with that might be, how's the follow-up happened? Or is there any follow-up? I know here in the U.S. there's rarely follow-up to, you go annually, but you don't necessarily do anything in between times with other clergy. I didn't know if you all had done anything there that might benefit us.
The Global Leadership Summit is one of those very exciting and transforming ministries that we have really just introduced in Sierra Leone. And I tell you, I don't know of the many other pastors, but I can really tell you of one pastor that I'm not going to name. He's been given some rare, difficult, and a hard time wherever he is. But he happens, when the Global Leadership Summit came, I told him to be part of the leadership team. And let me tell you, after the 1 or 2 experiences, he is just one of the best pastors we now have in the conference in terms of his leadership. And often, this is the man that will now come to my office and say, hey, Bishop, there's something happening here. What do we do about this? What do we do about this? And even coming to me to say there are certain elements of the Global Leadership Summit that we need to introduce. We have our ministerial retreat every year, and he has just brought in some of those topics that we have discussed that we will be discussing at the next Global Leadership Summit. The other thing that the Global Leadership Summit has done is that it has helped the various churches. CCSL is the Christian Council of Churches in Sierra Leone, and we have been working together, but what Global Leadership Summit has really done is to really enhance that togetherness even more. For the first time, I had the opportunity of sitting down in my office with about 5 heads of churches who came to my office to sit down to discuss Global Leadership Summit and the impact and the need for involvement of most of our pastors and lay persons in that program. So I believe that definitely in the next 2-3 years, it's going to be very phenomenal. We're really going to have some real dramatic changes in the leadership of our pastors, but not only that, but even the lay people in the church.
Thank you, Bishop. If I can just add, the UMC is very well represented at the summit because in Freetown, the venue is Bishop Buffman Memorial Church. It's a large UMC church, and that's where it was held last year and will be held again this year in Freetown. As far as follow-up, we also can do a lot better with follow-up, and so there's a plan to be more intentional about that and provide at least quarterly mini leadership events for those who have attended the summit to attend additional training quarterly.
Mr. Ernest Domahina here says he's a businessman who wants to do anything he could do to help us. and I wondered if we could get him to take one of our folders to the ambassador's office over there. When we met with the ambassador from the U.S. In January, he basically said, I wish you all would tell me who works here. I don't have any idea who you are. And if we are fairly representative of people in the United States who are involved there, it would be nice just to take him a folder or in some way give him the information so he would know that. But I really saw him as a person who wanted to work with us and, again, needed to be informed when we're there, which we'd never bothered to do, not thinking we were that important. Yeah. But anyway, it sounds like if you or someone else could just take him a folder that he could look at and then he would know who's involved, that might be a helpful thing to do.
Thank you. Beth Farrell.
Back to the communications. Is there an established way, Bishop, you mentioned emailing you and copying your secretary, and I know there's an UMVIM coordinator who's Smart Senate. Bill, okay. If a group that's getting organized to go emails you and copies those two people, would they then be able to get the information to the appropriate department within the Sierra Leonean Church, health, education, or whoever? Because people change as far as their name, their email address, and maybe you don't know who it is, and if there could be some simple way to do communication with just maybe 3 people that you email, or even make it a positional email instead of a name of a person. I'm just saying, you know, if I'm taking a team and I can email you and I copy your secretary and copy Smart Senate, and of course I know Beatrice, but there's, for people who don't know, is there a simple way that we could just do an email to you and copy 2 or 3 people and your office or your conference takes it from there to simplify that so nobody gets upset because they weren't notified? If they get upset, they can get upset with you guys.
We are going through some challenge in that area, and Smart Senate is actually working for Operation Classroom. Mm-hmm. And by courtesy of Operation Classroom, they loan him to us to also do the functions of a volunteer mission coordinator. But that is becoming a very overwhelming job for him. And naturally, he pays more attention to Operation Classroom because that's what the employees that are actually employing him. We are doing everything possible by the time we're going to next year to see if we can have a volunteer and mission coordinator that really coordinates all of the work for all of you, not specifically Operation Classroom. Because there are times when we have 2, 3, 4, 5 teams going at the same time, and there's Operation Classroom team going. The tendency has always been Smart will almost give lip service to these other teams and pay more attention to Operation Classroom, which is just natural and logical.
Yeah.
And so we are trying, hopefully by next year, to put in place a volunteer and mission coordinator who will be able to handle all of that. But for now, we have Reverend Ashcroft, who will send all of you, he is actually the Connection and Ministries Director. He is handling all of those communications. But when you do write him, I will always say, you write me and copy my secretary, and that information is passed around. But by now, I know all of you working in Sierra Leone actually know now the right contact persons. I know for health, it's Sister Banga. For education, for primary schools, it's Mr. Blow, and the education primary school people know him. For secondary school, we've just employed Mr. Pomai, and those are the actual contact persons. But what we want to do is to make sure that as many people in Sierra Leone working in the office are in the loop, so that just in case one person is not there, someone will just easily step in. But as a stopgap, hopefully next year, beginning March, we're trying to put in place somebody who will serve as a volunteer and mission coordinator.
Right now, we know that those names are the people, but names change and sometimes notifications are not done, which is what I'm trying to say. If we have a central place to send stuff to the conference and they know the appropriate person in case your setup changes, your hierarchy changes, it does not get lost in the shuffle. You send an email, we don't know if your internet is down, which is why we haven't responded or you haven't got a response. we don't know what's going on. It may have went to the wrong person who doesn't exist anymore. So, you know, if there was just some way to do it with just a couple or 3 email addresses to generic type emails, whoever the person is, and then they take it from there within your conference, and they can get back to us and say, this is your contact person, and then we can go from there.
Okay.
But right now, I know from experience in churches within the United States, people change, and then you've lost your contact. And yes, here we can pick up the telephone, you know, and find out or go online. So that's just a communications issue that we need to iron out, which should be fairly simply ironed out, in my opinion.
Are there any other questions from the panel or comments about church development goals and priorities?
I have one for the bishop. What kind of relationship do we have with the organization and the ambassador? I know we used to have a relationship with the previous ambassador, but since political stuff changes all the time, I don't know what kind of communication do we have with the ambassador and the president and the ministers in Sierra Leone.
The United Methodist Church, it took us some time, you know, before this time. But one thing I can assure you is that we now have a very positive relationship with almost every government official in Sierra Leone, and even more so with the present ambassador here. In fact, he was present with us 2 years ago when we met in camp here.
Yeah.
But this year, we also had the ambassador from Germany being with us there. What we have always done is that when we have these meetings, as much as many of our ambassadors, we always invite them to come to these meetings. But this year, for some reason, he had some other assignment outside here. I think he's also doubling as ambassador to Brazil. So he just went there to present his credentials. And that was why he sent his deputy, who was here with us these 2 days. But we have a very positive relationship with the government. The only thing I've scared a little bit from is corruption. Because even at the president's office or the first lady's office, they had done a file on me. And so that sometimes I had a direct access. But then as bishop of the church, you got to be very careful to remain as neutral as possible. Because almost every other political party or leadership coming in, we want to co-opt you. And you got to be careful because in the church, there are all of these members belonging to all of these political parties. But yes, we have a very good relationship. In fact, even at Tayama, as we had yesterday, the American embassy has supported the development, the rehabilitation of a whole health center for us.
Because the reason why I'm saying is, when we started this CRC thing, I know that I used to take all the passports, and they used to have an express fee, and it was waived. And I don't know that you have to wait 24 hours and go back and pick it up. They will give it to you within 2 hours. And I don't know whether we still have that relationship or pay that relationship for us between the embassy so that we don't have that issue. And that's what I'm saying, that corruption, when I say corruption, it's not individual, it's the government. Like if you need a building permit, the team is there 10 days. We need building permit. And how can we do it without not corrupting the government and all that? Have we created any relationship on that one so that we don't get that kind of breach that the team kind of cross?
There are 2 ways of all of you getting into Sierra Leone with or without visa, but eventually you get visa. I will always encourage you to have the visa here. But then we have another alternative where we will always write to the chief immigration officer, just in case you do not have a visa. And we know that, we will write to the chief immigration officer and then to say, X number of people are coming on this date, and we request that they be issued visa on arrival. And we have had no problem with that. All we have always done is for somebody from the office to go to the airport and identify them to say, these are the people coming to Sierra Leone. And then we'll write them the names. We'll write the names of all of those persons. It's always been very smooth. But just in case, we'll advise that you get your visa here before going. But just in case you do not, that's another alternative.
Any other questions or comments about church development goals and priorities in Sierra Leone.
Just a general question to the board, to the all five of you actually. How does the church in Sierra Leone anticipate involving the private community there, private businesses, and trying to create that kind of a partnership in country potential?
That's a good one. Sitting here, I come from the private sector. And the church in Sierra Leone, as you have seen from our discussions here, let's take the businesses of the church in Sierra Leone. For every major project, we go through a tendering process. There's a planned project, for instance, the rehabilitation of the head office. Then we'll go to tender, either by selective bidding or open. And we go through that process. Usually, such businesses like building and construction are in the hands of the private sector. So indirectly, we have invited the private sector to participate in our development. That is one good thing that the conference practices. Secondly, and more importantly, we don't claim to be an expertise in all areas as a church. And therefore, we equally call on members of our conference who are in the private sector to give us the technical advice on issues like we want to address, i.e., if it is architectural, then we have to look at the number of architects that are members of the United Methodist Conference. We ask their opinion, and they will give us their opinion. If it's a legal matter, even though the chancellor is part of the conference, but there are other lawyers who will challenge the chancellor, and they sit down and sort out the issue before the conference take a position on it. By those actions of the conference, we are really engaging the private sector.
Thank you. I probably should have articulated my question a little better also. Another way that I was thinking is that maybe the church is in a position to be kind of a broker to bring people together, and not necessarily in a business transaction, but so that maybe, I don't know if members of the business community have approached the church to help bring those members of the business community together to act as a coalition or something. It feels like maybe the church would be in a position to broker that in a way that any one of those private organizations might have trouble leading that sort of a coalition. Have you been approached by any, has the church been approached by any private entities to bring that kind of a coalition together, perhaps?
I think, if I may quote the bishop right, he's here, the Paloko land is a very good example where the bishop has even preached it in a sermon that that land is too big. It's about time that members of the conference consider to see if they can come together to form a private sector entity to do agricultural farming. He even suggested the way of stock sharing, that if you want to raise animal husbandry, you can contribute live goat, for instance, as your contribution. So you don't really need to have money to say, this is my share into this business. So those concepts are there on the table for us to take care of. I think the challenge now is to the private sector, people who are in the conference. But the conference has really made it open that they are ready to be engaged in that kind of business, because per se, they are not private sector business people. And I think the challenge is there for us who are in the private sector to take it up.
Thank you. We have run out of time. I think that is the same challenge we have in the United States of how to bring the private sector and the church together as well. So thank you for the panelists, and thank you for your questions from the audience.